We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With all the happenings in Martha's Vineyard, Delaware, Chicago, and New York, we're going huge on this week's Talking Liberty segment and monopolizing the precious time of constitutional crusader, legal affairs editor, and host of the Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Not all crusaders wear capes, some wear jabots. So, Scott, we have red state governors sending buses to avowed sanctuary cities, places that openly say they welcome illegal immigrants and illegal immigrants are safe here. To use the American phrase,
no one is illegal.
No one is illegal. Scott, where's the beef?
Well, the beef is that I think it is that they perceive an opening to attack a political enemy. And so the beef therein lies
they being
the
whom?
Opportunity. Well, the people who are attacking, it's a case of how dare you use these people as a political, as political pawns. I'm now going to use them as a cudgel to beat you over the head with. That seems to me to be how it's laid out.
Okay, so I noticed that the Fourth Estate does seem particularly aghast at these happenings. Now, why is there no outcry? I really want to dig into the mechanics here, because what we're seeing is an outcry over Ron DeSantis, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, sending 50 illegal immigrants to Martha's Vineyard. That's what's really kicked this off. Obviously, there was some in Chicago. There's been from courtesy of Governor Greg Abbott. Arizona sent some out as well to the front door of Kamala Harris's
the
VP
Naval
residence.
Observatory. Yeah.
Now, they seem shocked at it. The Fourth Estate is shocked at it. You have Democrat politicians tearing their hair, rending their beards in a very biblical sense. But Joe Biden sending planes full of illegal migrants to unsuspecting cities. Now, these are unsuspecting locations because they don't know about it, in the middle of the night. And to paraphrase Peter Doocy and Karine Jean-Pierre, well, it was in the middle of the night. I wouldn't classify these as middle of the night. Well, it was 2 a.m. Sure. These have been happening for more than a year, and they've been greatly outlined by New York Post's Miranda Devine very, very well. So why the outcry for one and not the outcry for the other? Is it a case of it's okay when we do it, as British polemicist Paul Joseph Watson likes to say?
Yes, that's exactly
Right.
That's exactly what it is. Also, I would say that in the defense of the position that you ascribe to the big box media, I don't think that's wrong to ascribe it to them. I'm just saying, in defense of their position, you could say that while Biden is doing his midnight flights in order to manage the influx of massive influx of illegal aliens, or somewhat legal, depending on their status as asylum seekers.
I think what you're getting there too, Scott, is are they actual asylum seekers?
Well, before we get into that, I was just trying to make the point where it seems quite clearly that Mr. DeSantis is doing this to make a political point. And I don't think that Biden, a midnight flight to Cleveland, from San Antonio is to make a political point. Now, there are political ramifications to it, perhaps, but it's not done to make a point with. It's in fact, it's the opposite. It's kept in darkness and in secrecy, rather than they have to sue and FOIA request if they're lucky to try to get the details of these things, rather than the opposite of the Abbott and Santis measures, which are designed to make a point publicly.
Yeah, I think it's a point that has really been made well in terms of bringing the attention to people, as they say, DeSantis Airlines bringing the border to your city. Now, let's talk briefly about the legality here, Scott. So we hear, as you say, in these sanctuary cities, no person is illegal. And I understand that a lot of the media and politicians are saying that, well, you can't treat refugees and asylum seekers like this. Now, I don't know U.S. law particularly well at all, or British law for that matter. I may as well be completely open in that. But I'm under the impression that to be an asylum seeker, you have to report to a a port of entry. Is that not correct?
There are certain reporting places that are required for asylum seekers. I know that is part of the law.
So I believe none of these reporting centers are along a 200-mile stretch of the Rio Grande.
I don't know that.
As in the whole 200-mile stretch of the Rio Grande is not a reporting center. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. But I think that at least some of the persons who were transported to Martha's Vineyard did in fact check in at did formally apply for asylum protection.
Right. So that brings up my next question. We had the disaster relief fund, or the emergency relief fund, that Martha's Vineyard is in possession of, which I believe is to the tune of at least several $1 million. They said that was only, they couldn't use that fund for the 50 or so souls that turned up on the bus, because that was for people who have gone through the asylum process. So some of those people had gone through the asylum process, as far as you know.
Well, I'm basing some of this on the lawsuit that's funded by Mr. Soros. That
we will get to that. Absolutely, yes.
Talking about, but I'm basing some of my information, Mark, on information that was contained in that complaint. So the reason why I'm using that information, because I think it's the most direct line from the mouth of one of the people, a Venezuelan refugee, told to their lawyer and then filed with the court. And according to that sort of chain of information, they have formally filed and are legally able to remain in the United States until there's more action on their request for asylum.
Okay, good. Now let's talk specifically about this lawsuit. This lawsuit has been brought by, I mean, that's one of the two big developments, isn't it? There are two major developments in this particular issue at the moment. The first one is the Democrat sheriff who claimed he was investigating Ron DeSantis for kidnapping. Now, I do want your expert legal take on that.
I want to move down to his county, Mark, because clearly there is not much else going on in terms of crime. And
apparently not.
It's so awful when these elected officials decide to turn their very narrow and not easy challenges in terms of doing their jobs into like this platform to try to get national political attention. It always baffles me whether it's Republicans who do it or Democrats. You get some state attorney general who, instead of prosecuting like identity theft, decides they want to make a national point on guns or abortion or anyway. Side ran over.
That's right. All you have to look at is it an election year? And I think we'll see why these things are happening. So, but the second point, the second big thing that's really come up is the lawsuit. And so you have several Venezuelan immigrants sent to Martha's Vineyards, and they're now suing Governor Ron DeSantis. So the first question, Scott, is these poor migrants, they cross the border, some of them illegally, as you point out, at least one individual going through the proper port of entry. They don't have a place to stay. They require food and shelter from the aggrieved citizens of Martha's Vineyards. But all of a sudden, they have a team of crack lawyers filing a class action. These folks must be real self-starters. And to come back to a point you said earlier, they appear to have the phone number of a certain Mr. George Soros. That cannot be true. Surely this is some kind of dog whistle.
That may be a bit rich, Mark. They are being represented by an organization that takes the lion's share of its funding from Mr. Soros. So I don't know that.
But he's just paying for it. He's not involved in it.
I don't know that we could say he was on the phone, directing the filing.
I was obviously speaking hyperbolically, but he is paying for it.
He just
let's get that straight. He is paying for it.
Purses his lips and blows a little bit and sets his sailboats adrift on the ocean of progressivism, towards victory. So they're funded by Soros. The group is Alianzas Americas, and they get every year they cash big fat multiple 7-figure check from Soros, and this is part of what they're doing with their money. They're trying to get a class certified, so the class would be every person on the plane, the 50 migrants on the plane to Martha's Vineyard. And I did read like more than half of the 35-page complaint in order to understand what their arguments
were. Well, that's
are.
Clearly your job done, Scott, if you read at least half of the 35 pages.
Oh, well, you don't need to read more than listen, I went a lot further than I needed to in order to assess the legal validity of it. I mean,
and what's your take?
The crux of the complaint is that when these people were on the plane itself, they were falsely imprisoned because at that point they couldn't leave the plane at any time. It is a baffling basis.
Well, Scott, I believe if that is the basis of a complaint, Spirit Airways is in big trouble.
You know, it'd be one thing to say. It would be one thing to say, like, so part of the thing is fraud. So the fraud is the idea that these people were promised they would get certain resources and jobs and so forth, housing assistance, once they landed in Massachusetts. And part of it rests on this quote unquote phony brochure that these DeSantis people allegedly printed up and gave to the people. But when you read the complaint, Mark, this is why it's important to read at least half of the complaint. When you read the complaint, you learn that those people weren't even given the brochure until shortly before they landed at Martha's Vineyard. So the idea that they were somehow sold a bill of goods vis-a-vis the brochure to be induced to get on the plane, when in fact even in the complaint, they don't even allege that they were given that brochure until again, shortly before landing. It's a bit...
One point to bring up here, because I have been looking into this story quite in depth, is the brochure. It was not produced by Massachusetts. However, the information that is in the brochure was copied and pasted from the Massachusetts website and then put on a piece of paper. That makes it
more nefarious in the eyes of the counsel for the plaintiffs.
Of course, using somebody's own words against them is, I believe that's unconstitutional in America. Is that right?
And it also, it belies, like the point of their complaint is that they left these people sort of high and dry, but yet apparently the details that were replicated in the brochure include details on how to contact the Massachusetts authorities for resources. And by the way, Mark, I am not an immigration attorney. That is an area of the law that is highly specialized, and you would never, if you could afford it, go to a sort of general type lawyer for immigration work. You'd only want to go to somebody who regularly practices in that area. It's so fraught with its own vocabulary, even rules and procedures. But immigration attorneys that I value their opinion, they say if you were going to have an immigration hearing, you don't want to be along the border, along the Rio Grande. Your client's much likely to get their asylum application approved if they're in like the Western District of Massachusetts or a Massachusetts court or some other court that doesn't see an ocean of these applicants every day, and because of that, tends to grant fewer applications.
Because justice is geography. We're talking with Liberty Nation's Scott D. Cosenza. Don't go anywhere. After this short break, we'll be back with Scott talking about Ron DeSantis' criminal liability. Will Ron DeSantis be running for prison 2024?
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe space.
You only did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.